Spitfire Audio is one of the world's leading virtual instrument companies. Founded in 2007 by two award-winning composers, they make sounds for music creators and have collaborated with major composers, producers, and world-renowned studios, including Trevor Horn, Hans Zimmer, Air Studios, and the BBC. Celebrating their 15th year, Spitfire's team have given us access to the processes and the people behind one of their sample library ranges. Through the lens of the Abbey Road Orchestra project, captured at arguably the most famous studio in the world, Abbey Road Studio 1, we are going to take a deep dive into how a sample library of this size gets made. We'll take a look at this in chapters. Co-founder and composer Paul Thompson walks us through how the concept of this library came to be.
Beginning a project like this is always guided by my experience as a composer. So I'll always start with the idea of what would I use myself? And in a lot of the collaborations that we've done, we have often started with that idea in mind. So if it was a choir with Eric Whittaker or, Hans Zimmer strings with Hans Zimmer, it's always guided by the idea that what would you want to use? What would the creative person want to use? And from then outwards, we try to make it as diverse and usable as possible in lots of different situations. From the earliest conversations, Mirik had a lot of ideas about how we could develop this project together. And one of the things that has been a real pleasure is having the insight to the history of the studios, as well as our kind of background and expertise in recording sample libraries and creative tools. So you've got something that respects and celebrates the history and the sound of the room, but also is primarily, a musical creative tool.
It sounds like cinema to me whenever I hear it. I mean, to stand in Studio One as an orchestra is playing is kind of quite a mind-blowing experience. I mean, the room just sings. Some of my favourite scores have been done in there, like if I think of like Raiders of the Lost Ark and like the map room scene, you kind of got the LSO with London Voices, like the choir in the room at the same time, and it's just an amazing sound. It really is. And then obviously with like modern like Marvel films, etc., it's the same thing. Like that sound is still there from those early films to modern films. It's like this fingerprint, this DNA of Abbey Road, and it's a huge sound. Yeah, it's great.
So there's no official Abbey Road Orchestra, obviously, unlike, say, the BBC Symphony Orchestra. But what this describes is a collection of some of the best session players in London and in the world who've come together to record this modular orchestra package. They're usually booked by a contractor. We always work with Hilary Skews. Sometimes you have specific musicians that you want to use for a certain sound, but the kind of characteristic sound of film scores, TV scores, game scores that are recorded in London tend to have this blend of incredible players.
Funnily, it's a bit like being a casting director on film and television. So my job is to bring musicians into the studio to record a score. So one of the interesting things with sampling, as opposed to coming into a studio to work on a score, you're being asked to do sounds, you're being asked to do techniques. A lot of the players really love it. You get into a zone, and they tell us they get into a zone. It's almost like a meditation, and it gets you into this most pure relationship with your instruments. And you're having to do something again and again, but which is, it's a real tester.
Bringing world-class performers into studio is one thing. The meticulous recording and engineering of the samples is crucial to capture the most detail possible. Who better for this than Abbey Road senior engineer, Simon Rhodes?
Our history with Simon Rhodes goes back to the very, very beginning, where we created the what we now refer to as the Bespoke Orchestra project. And this was really just a response to not being happy with the sounds that we were using to write with. And it was a small group of composers who kind of banded together, in a sense, to record sounds in the way that they're recorded for an actual score. So instead of kind of recording in this slightly scientific way and then try and create a room from it, we recorded in the room with the mics all set up. And that was the idea behind it. And we kind of went through and recorded the entire orchestra in a relatively basic format. I mean, certainly nothing like the detail and spec that we do now. But the history of that package was that the first time it was used really on a huge project and was a key part of the post-production process was on the first Avatar.
I think I became aware of Spitfire back in 2009. The existing sample libraries just weren't really cutting it, in the commercial ones at least. And then along came this new private Spitfire library, which was just sounded terrific. Clearly the best sounding library out there. And that was obviously a very early project for Spitfire, and they've learned, like we all do, we learn along the way, and things just get better and better with every go around, And this go around now, I mean, it's so detailed. The amount of articulations and dynamic layers and that goes into every single patch is mind-blowing. I've never seen anything like it.
The team at Spitfire Audio are artist-led and artist-centric. They're no stranger to delivering large orchestral projects. This time, however, Harry Wilson and Rohan Burt from the product team had quite an undertaking to develop new techniques and to push the boundaries on what Spitfire had released before.
The Abbey Road Orchestra is such a large project that it takes all of the steps that you have to make when designing any sample library and just kind of expands them out. So you've got a real ideation stage at the start where you figure out what products you are trying to make or what problem you're trying to solve. And then within that, you have a whole host of validation. If we're trying to make that, what should be in it, how we should build each of those instruments and techniques, how much depth there should be, how are people likely to use it. So a whole kind of a validation stage that proves to you as the designer of the library that you're going in the right direction.
So the pre-production stage really is a significant part of the whole project, really. Looking at what articulations we need, how we want to capture them, best ways to record them, best charts that are going to make that possible, and also finding ways with the players as well through the production process that makes their performances as expressive as they can possibly be, because that's what we want. We want that human touch as well. So on the sessions, it's quite busy. There's a bit back and forth with the players, but behind the scenes, there's also a lot going on.
Beyond that, once you've got your list of what should be in there, what kind of content should be in it, then you have to make sure that it's going to be possible to get in the studio and record it all. It takes a lot of studio hours to fill some of these libraries. The Abbey Road library is the longest one that we've done. Each section can be 40 plus hours with musicians in the studio.
Well, we're always striving to improve on what we've done in the past, and specifically real expressive melodic legato style techniques, which is what everybody wants, of course. We are looking at ways we can improve that with recording different styles of intervals that will be dynamically recalled as you play, sort of thing. So we're not just recording one set of intervals, we're recording multiple different styles and speeds and ways of getting to the notes that will be contained under the hood, under the patch, where the user doesn't necessarily have to interact with that, which makes really, really playable patches. We're really taking it to the next level here. We've recorded a lot more material for it, a lot more dynamics, a lot more depth. So that's something perhaps that's different that we've specifically tried to hone in on this project. But of course, the other side of things is the detail as well. So more round robins, more dynamic layers, and really focusing on the consistency of those performances as well between each session, so that when we come to blend it together, being able to refer back to earlier sessions that we did with different players to really hone in on that's the right length, that's the right style, that's the right phrase, that's the right attack, that's the right feel.
For all of the planning that goes into a project of this size, there are always problems that creep up to delay or disrupt the course. One such global event in 2020 led to changes in the recording and release schedules.
So we're in production for these libraries for quite a long time. We're in the studio for a good few months for each section, each library that we release. We got really, really lucky actually with the start of the project, because COVID had just hit the UK. And you couldn't have people in the studio. We certainly couldn't have a full string section sitting in the room. But we were able to start with percussion, which was within the guidelines. So we managed to get through a whole load of percussion recordings, which are absolutely fantastic. A really nice way in to the project for us to really make sure we had our bearings straight. And as soon as we could get players back in a room safely and in their right positions, we started getting the bigger sections in, starting with the first violins. And that's when a lot of the new research that we'd done started to really pay off. We'd had a good amount of time to get our teeth into it, so we could come straight back in with a bang, which is really nice, really fun. A lot of the time we're working with new techniques. We've done research and development to make sure that we're always pushing, make sure that we're always solving new problems with the material we're making. And some of that's in the studio, in the performance, but some of that's in the development itself. So even when we're planning, we're looking ahead to how we're going to build that thing, how we're going to make sure that once it's through into software, that it actually does what we intend it to do. So it's a really large and long process that as soon as you have a large project like this becomes years of work, and that's exactly what we've done here. We've had about 2 years of pre-production to really deeply understand what we were trying to achieve with the line.
The feature set is something we think really, really hard about when we're developing these products. The UI we have is something that we're constantly iterating on. So there's always things we can do to improve and add features to that. We have a kind of well-trodden kind of back end, and adding stuff to that is the approach that we take. And anything we can improve on features that we have existing are things that we want to do as well. So there's been a few things specifically for this collection of libraries that we've not done before. So, for example, in the percussion, this right-left mapping feature that we've never done before, whereby we can map the individual hands of the performer onto different keys. And we recorded discrete right and left-hand performances and then worked out a way that we could present that on a keyboard, be able to kind of switch that in and out if you wanted that. But it's really honing in on that level of detail that perhaps other libraries kind of miss out on, those little nuances, those little bits that really make things sound ultra realistic. It's quite an important step that we really know, okay, this is what we need in order to make that feature work.
It's not just the legacy of Studio One that made a collaboration between Abbey Road and Spitfire Audio a no-brainer. The history and knowledge passed down within these walls from engineer to engineer is priceless.
I didn't always use this. It took a while to get there, over the years. I've learned from my predecessors. I've seen what they use. I've seen what people who visit the studio use, and I've seen what really doesn't work. And so you learn by people's mistakes, and you learn by people's the good things that people do. The combination of all this knowledge is where we are now. I mean, if you're doing a regular session, people want to book a 3-hour session, and they want 3 hours worth of work out of it. They can't wait for you for 20 minutes to sort of get your sound. You have to have everything set in advance, and that's where, obviously experience kicks in. But on a session like this, you've got time to experiment. For some of the percussion, we were experimenting with PZM mics. There were certain instruments that you maybe play hand percussion, and the percussion sits on the floor, and you can put a PZM underneath, and it gives a really nice, interesting colour that you couldn't normally get a microphone under there. But we found something that worked really quite well. Something I quite like to do every now and again is to, on the bigger drums, is to put a capsule really close to the drum. Something you shouldn't try at home, but we were doing it, and I sometimes put an NS10 right up against the drum, just to get that ultra low frequency that you don't really get when the drum is played loudly and hard. You get it when it's played very quietly. But I do put omnis up against drums, because the omnis obviously got the very low range on them, and that can work quite well until you start hitting the drum hard, in which they can't cope. But up to that point they sound really exciting. Obviously we've got a lot of mics up here because we're giving the end user a great deal of things to play with, a lot more than I'd normally put up. But I like to give myself a little bit of flexibility and wiggle room. Typically, I give myself 3 or 4 different perspectives, depending on what sort of music it is and how much control I need. And by perspectives, I mean from something which is a long way away, ambient mics, to the tree, which is a very full, rich sound, to a subcardioid alternative, which is much more controlled, but not as close as a spot mic situation. So, you might be in a situation where you've got a very loud piece of music and the brass are blaring, completely obliterating the strings. But if you pull up the subcardiots, you'll find that everything's a lot more controlled. And then, of course, we've got the variety of close mic colors as well, that it would be great to give the user, like ribbons and cardioids and all sorts of things to play with.
One of the things that we've really thought about here is to make this future-proof. The performances by the musicians are timeless. If you've got something that sounds incredible and is a really beautifully performed note, then that is something that will never age. So beyond that, it's more about what level of control does the end user have over the sounds. And that's the key thing. And we've built into the process, every possible conception that we could think about of the way that you would use this. So it might be for example, with the violins, it might be playing a lyrical, beautiful, romantic melody, but it can equally be fiery runs up and down, that kind of thing. So it's thinking about all of that and making sure that using this in 10 years' time, you'll still have the level of control and detail that you need.
In the next chapter, we'll take you into Studio One to get a closer look at how a sample library is performed and recorded. See you next time.